concerns grow that Beijing may directly intervene in the crisis.
A powerful tropical storm lashed Japan on Thursday, bringing strong winds and torrential rain that claimed at least one life, prompted warnings of landslides and flooding, and sparked evacuation advisories and travel chaos at a peak holiday period.
Police said a vulnerable Franco-Irish teen who disappeared from a Malaysian rainforest resort likely starved and died of internal bleeding with no immediate sign of foul play. Nora Quarren, 15, is thought to have died 2 or 3 days ago after a week in the jungle, and there was no indication she was abducted or assaulted, according to police.
And Asian markets fall after the Dow suffered its worst day of the year on growing concerns about the health of the global economy, with a key U.S. benchmark raising a recession warning.
I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. Thousands of Chinese military personnel have been seen parading at a sports stadium across the border from Hong Kong. Some of those inside were wearing armed police insignias, while outside there were dozens of trucks and armored personnel carriers. Take a look. Armored vehicles were also seen inside the stadium in Shenzhen, with the event taking place as concerns build that China may intervene to end the 10 weeks of unrest in Hong Kong. State-run media reported this week that the elements of the People's Armed Police, or PAP, which is under the command of the Central Military Commission, were assembling in Shenzhen. The People's Daily and Global Times, two of the most powerful state-run media outlets, published videos on Monday of what it said was the PAP assembling in Shenzhen. U.S. President Donald Trump also said on Tuesday American intelligence had confirmed Chinese troop movements toward the Hong Kong border. The Chinese military has not interfered in Hong Kong since the handover, but it should be called on by the city's government. It can be called on by the city's government to maintain public order. Chinese authorities have on 2 occasions this week linked violent protests in Hong Kong to terrorism, and they've consistently described protesters as rioters.
Filipinos are advised to avoid several areas in Hong Kong that are identified as protest venues. In an advisory issued on Wednesday, the Philippine Consulate General in Hong Kong asked Filipino nationals to refrain from wearing black or white and avoid the following areas during the ongoing protests. August 15, Wan Kai Taxation Office. August 17, Chatter Garden, Central to Central Government Offices. Admiralty Hung Hom Pier to Sung Won Toy Garden, Kowloon. August 18, Victoria Park, Causeway Bay to Chatter Road, Central. August 19, Clean UP MTR carriages. August 25, Kwai Tiang Theater, Kwai Chung to Tsuen Wan Park. The Consulate General said it received reports that demonstrators will gather in these areas. In case of emergency, it asked Filipinos to immediately contact the consulate's hotline for assistance. The Department of Foreign Affairs also asked those planning to visit Hong Kong to defer their trip until tensions subside. The statement also comes following the earlier cancellation of all outbound flights from Hong Kong after riot police clashed with airport protesters on Monday. These demonstrations were sparked by a bill proposed in June 2019, which allows Hong Kong to detain and extradite people who are wanted in territories that it does not have extradition agreements with, such as mainland China or Taiwan.
Meanwhile, President Trump has urged China to humanely resolve the violent standoff with pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong on the back of growing concerns that Beijing is considering direct intervention in the crisis. Now, images taken by AFP on Thursday showed thousands of Chinese military personnel waving red flags and parading at a sports stadium in the city of Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong. Dozens of armored personnel carriers and supply trucks were also parked nearby. Washington has become increasingly alarmed by Chinese security forces gathering near the border with Hong Kong as the protests show no signs of abating, and Beijing intensifies its drumbeat of intimidation against a movement pushing for democratic reforms. Now, millions of jobs are being lost in China to other non-tariff countries. Thousands of companies are leaving. Of course, China wants to make a deal. Let them work humanely with Hong Kong first. Trump wrote on Twitter in the first clear indication that the trade deal could be threatened by how Beijing reacts to the protests. I have zero doubt that if President Xi wants to quickly and humanely solve the Hong Kong problem, he can do it, Trump said in a subsequent tweet, suggesting a personal meeting with Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping.
The United States expressed concerns over Chinese security force movements on the border with Hong Kong and urged Beijing to honor the territory's autonomy as pro-democracy protests continued. A day after President Donald Trump appeared to take a hands-off position on the protests, a State Department spokesperson voiced concerns about the continued erosion of Hong Kong's autonomy and expressed staunch support for freedom of expression and peaceful assembly in the territory. And senior members of Congress declared their backing for the protesters, blaming Beijing for a violent crackdown by the Hong Kong government. Images of Beijing-backed forces brutalizing civilians speak for themselves, tweeted Mitch McConnell, the powerful Republican Senate Majority Leader. He said millions of Hong Kongers protesting the Chinese Communist Party's encroachment know the truth about exactly who is responsible for inciting chaos. The rest of the world knows too. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives, called the use of force perpetrated against the demonstrators extremely alarming. In a statement, she said, the pro-Beijing chief executive and the Hong Kong police forces must immediately cease the aggression and abuse being perpetrated against their own people.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters accused authorities of lying about flight cancellations during Tuesday's mass disruption at the city's airport. They called it an attempt to shift the blame to demonstrators. Take a listen.
As the airport authority claimed that all outbound flights were cancelled, sure, this was a visually appealing and striking PR stunt. But the dashboards littered with red cancelled labels were simply yet another pack of lies. Many flights, in fact, took off as scheduled. We are saddened to see that the authorities have chosen to waste their time and resources on offloading their own responsibilities onto protesters rather than to attend to the real culprit, its own failure to address the 5 demands of its own citizens. We are saddened to see that an injunction has been the method resorted to by the government to impose their will on our freedom of expression.
Pro-democracy protesters retreated from Hong Kong's airport on Wednesday.
Pro-democracy protesters retreated from Hong Kong's airport on Wednesday following 2 days of hugely disruptive rallies that turned violent and plunged the global financial hub further into turmoil. The protests ended early Wednesday morning following a series of clashes in which a policeman drew his gun after being beaten by demonstrators and other officers fired pepper spray. The rallies paralyzed one of the world's busiest travel hubs. It deepened a 10-week crisis that is the biggest challenge to Chinese rule of Hong Kong since its 1997 British handover.
China will not sit by and watch and is ready to quell the unrest swiftly if the crisis in Hong Kong becomes uncontrollable, China's ambassador to London said on Thursday. If the situation deteriorates further into unrest uncontrollable by the SAR or Special Administrative Region government, then the central government will not sit by and watch, Liu Xiaoming said in a televised press conference. Images taken by AFP earlier on Thursday showed thousands of Chinese military personnel waving red flags and parading at a sports stadium in the city of Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong. He also protested against foreign interference in the Hong Kong protests and urged British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government to handle the issue with great caution. I think some politicians in this country still regard Hong Kong as part of the British Empire, he said. China earlier this month warned Britain to stop meddling after Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab called Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam and emphasized the need for a fully independent investigation into recent events.
To other news now. Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed on Thursday his path-breaking move to strip the restive region of Kashmir of its autonomy in a tub-thumping speech marking Indian Independence Day. Take a look.
अगर 2014 से 2019 आवश्यकताओं की पूर्ति का दौर था, तो 2019 के बाद का कालखंड देशवासियों की आकांक्षाओं की पूर्ति का कालखंड है, उनके सपनों को साकार करने का कालखंड है। आर्टिकल 370 और 35A क्या कारण था? इस सरकार की पहचान है, हम समस्याओं के टालते भी नहीं हैं, हम समस्याओं को टालते भी नहीं हैं और न ही हम समस्याओं को पालते हैं। अब समस्याओं को टालने का भी वक्त नहीं है, अब समस्याओं को पालने का भी वक्त नहीं है।
Parts of Kashmir that India controls, it is split with arch-rival Pakistan, have been under lockdown since August 4, with freedom of movement restricted and phones and the internet cut. A day later, New Delhi scrapped Article 370 in the Indian Constitution that had granted Kashmir special status, splitting the state of Jammu and Kashmir in two and downgrading them to Union territories. Fearing protests and unrest over India's latest move, tens of thousands of extra Indian troops have been deployed to Kashmir, joining 500,000 that is already there. Modi said the mainstreaming of the Kashmiri people with the rest of the nation would expedite development and create new jobs with investment from public and private companies. He accused neighboring Pakistan of using the past arrangement as a weapon to incite people of the region against India. Meanwhile, Pakistan has launched a diplomatic offensive aimed at reversing the order and formally asked the United Nations Security Council to hold an emergency session to address India's illegal actions. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has compared Modi's government to Nazi Germany, said that time had come to teach Delhi a lesson and promised to fight until the end against any Indian aggression.
ना नरेंद्र मोदी आप इस कौम के ऊपर इनको गुलाम बना सकेंगे और ये जो पाकिस्तान के ऊपर आपने ये सोचा हुआ कि आज़ाद कश्मीर पे कुछ हमें सबक सिखाने का, आप तैयार हो जाए। फिर से मैं कहता हूं कि आपकी ईंट का जवाब आप पत्थर से देंगे और आपको इंशाअल्लाह आपको वक्त आ गया कि आपको एक सबक सिखाएंगे। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। कोई जो जंग चली है, जंग कभी भी मसले का हल नहीं होता। आप एक मसला हल करने जाते 3 और मसले खड़े हो जाते हैं, और यही बहुत बड़ी नरेंद्र मोदी की मिसकैलकुलेशन है। मेरा अपना ख्याल है कि आप देखेंगे कि इसके बाद इवेंट्स किधर जाते हैं।
Kashmir has been divided between India and Pakistan since independence from Britain in 1947 and has been the spark for 2 major wars and countless clashes between the 2 nuclear-armed arch rivals.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged India and Pakistan to refrain from taking any steps that would affect the status of Kashmir. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric said Guterres is also concerned over reports of restrictions on the Indian side of Kashmir. Watch this.
The Secretary General has been following the situation in Jammu and Kashmir with concern and makes an appeal for maximum restraint. The position of the United Nations on this region is governed by the Charter of the United Nations and applicable Security Council resolutions. The Secretary General also recalls the 1972 Agreement on Bilateral Relations between India and Pakistan, also known as the Simla Agreement, which states that the final status of Jammu and Kashmir is to be settled by peaceful means in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. The Secretary General is also concerned over reports of restrictions on the Indian side of Kashmir, which could exacerbate the human rights situation in the region. The Secretary General calls on all parties to refrain from taking steps that could affect the status of Jammu and Kashmir.
In other news, a powerful tropical storm lashed Japan on Thursday, bringing strong winds and torrential rain that claimed at least 1 life, prompted warnings of landslides and flooding, and sparked evacuation advisories and travel chaos at a peak holiday period. Typhoon Kroza landed near Kure in western Hiroshima on Thursday afternoon while traveling north and packing winds of up to 126 kilometers per hour. According to the Japan Meteorological Agency, 6 people were injured overnight in Hiroshima and 4 other prefectures, according to the Fire and Disaster Management Agency. It said that a total of 11 injuries have been reported since the slow-moving typhoon last week reached the region, part of which is still recovering from last year's deadly flooding. Authorities issued a voluntary evacuation advisory to around 430,000 people in the storm's path, although few appeared to have heeded the warning. The National Disaster Management Agency said a party of 18 people, including children, got stranded during a barbecue in a valley when the river rose rapidly on Wednesday. They were rescued Thursday morning. At least 761 domestic flights were canceled to and from cities in western Japan, and bullet train services were either scrapped or sharply reduced.
Japan's new emperor spoke Thursday of deep remorse over the country's wartime past in his first speech to commemorate the end of World War II since his enthronement in May. Emperor Naruhito's comments were being monitored in Tokyo and throughout Asia for any change in tone, but he closely echoed the language employed by his father Akihito.
ここに過去を顧み深い反省の上に立って再び戦争の惨禍が繰り返されぬことを切に願い、
歴史の教訓を深く胸に刻み、世界の平和と繁栄に力を尽くしてまいりました。戦争の惨禍を二度と繰り返さない、この誓いは昭和、平成、そして令和の時代においても決して変わることはありません。
Conservative Prime Minister Shinzo Abe shied away from visiting a controversial shrine that commemorates war dead, including convicted war criminals, that has become a flashpoint with Japan's neighbors, especially China and South Korea. This year's ceremonies came as Tokyo and South Korea, one of the countries that suffered most from Japan's wartime military atrocities, are embroiled in a war of words over trade and history.
In other news, Malaysian police said there were no signs of foul play in the death of a 15-year-old London girl who mysteriously disappeared from a nature resort. Her autopsy showed she succumbed to intestinal bleeding due to starvation and stress. Nora Quarren, 15, is thought to have died 2 or 3 days ago after a week in the jungle. And there was no indication she was abducted or assaulted, police said, citing the results of an autopsy. Her family believed the teen who had learning difficulties had been abducted, but police classified her disappearance as a missing persons case. A group of volunteers who were part of the search and rescue team found the body after being tipped off by a member of the public. It was discovered in the official search zone in an area that the team had previously covered. Her family had said it was extremely unlikely the reserved youngster would have wandered off on her own. She had a condition known as prosencephaly, where the brain fails to develop normally. She had limited verbal communication and could only write a few words.
The United States applied for the seizure of an Iranian oil tanker detained in Gibraltar, which is at the center of a standoff between Tehran and London, the public prosecutor said. The announcement by attorney Joseph Trier came ahead of a court decision on whether to extend the detention of Grace 1. The tanker was seized last month in a British Royal Navy operation off Gibraltar. It's suspected of violating European Union sanctions on oil shipments to Syria, and its seizure deepened international tensions in the Persian Gulf. The Gibraltar government says it is seeking to de-escalate the situation over the Grace 1. The Gibraltar Supreme Court decision on the fate of the ship has been adjourned until 4 p.m.
To the U.S. now, 6 police officers were shot and wounded in the U.S. city of Philadelphia on Wednesday during an hours-long incident that began when police tried to execute a narcotics warrant, according to the Philadelphia Police Department. All of the officers were later released from hospital, but Police Commissioner Richard Ross Jr. said that in 30 years he had never seen so many officers shot over such a long period of time. The incident comes after 2 mass shootings in the U.S. earlier this month, one in Dayton, Ohio, and the other in El Paso, Texas, left a total of 31 people dead. 2 other officers who had been trapped in a house with a suspected shooter who had been firing out of the window were finally freed later in the evening, according to Ross during a press conference. The suspect was later taken into custody and SWAT personnel were clearing the house, according to department spokesman Eric Grip on Twitter. Now, Grip had first tweeted about the incident hours earlier, around 4:40 p.m. local time, and then he continued to advise the public to stay away from the area throughout the evening. He also explained that the episode began as an attempt to execute a narcotics warrant, quote, that went awry almost immediately. Despite rampant gun violence in the U.S., efforts to strengthen firearms regulations remain divisive in the country, where the powerful National Rifle Association works to block stricter rules.
A Spanish charity which operates a migrant rescue boat in the Mediterranean said that a court in Italy has suspended the government decree banning its vessel from entering Italian territorial waters.
Hablo de que hemos tumbado el decreto de seguridad de Salvini en el que nos prohibía entrar en aguas italianas bajo amenaza de confiscarnos el barco. Podemos entrar en aguas italianas sin miedo a que se nos multe y se nos confisque el barco. Eso es lo que ando diciendo, y que también ha dictaminado que hay que desembarcar estas personas, pero no dicen qué puerto. Por lo tanto, es el gobierno italiano en el que tiene que responder ahora a su administración, a su justicia, ¿no? Veremos cómo.
The open arms boat is currently sailing off the coast of Italy's southern Lampedusa Island with 147 migrants who were plucked from boats in the Mediterranean this month. Both Italy and Malta refused its permission to dock and unload its passengers. The decree was signed by Italy's far-right Interior Minister Matteo Salvini at the beginning of August, banning the open arms from entering Italy's territorial waters, saying it was needed to protect public order. Under the decree, the Proactiva open arms could be slapped with a fine of up to 1 million euros and its boat seized if it disobeyed. Shortly after the ruling, Salvini and the Italian Interior Ministry said it will appeal Wednesday's court ruling.
A Russian pilot was being hailed as a hero on Thursday for landing an Airbus carrying more than 230 people in a Moscow cornfield after a bird strike. Take a look. The Ural Airlines A321 flying to Crimea hit a flock of seagulls shortly after takeoff from Moscow's Shukovsky Airport on Thursday morning, according to the Rosaviastia Air Transport Agency in a statement. Birds were sucked into the engines, and the crew decided to immediately land, bringing the plane down in the cornfield about a kilometer from the runway with the engines off and the landing gear retracted. The aircraft, carrying 226 passengers and 7 crew, was evacuated using inflatable ramps. The health ministry said 23 people were sent to hospital, but there were no serious injuries. Only one patient, a 69-year-old woman with moderate injuries, required further hospitalization. Russia's investigative committee said it had opened a probe into the incident.
Climbers wanting to take on Mount Everest will first have to tackle another Nepal mountain of at least 6,500 meters under new proposals by a committee seeking to improve safety on the world's highest peak. The requirement is being proposed after a deadly traffic-clogged season saw 11 climbers die on Everest, which some experts blamed on inexperience. The committee also proposed a fee of at least $35,000 for Everest and $20,000 for other mountains over 8,000 meters amid criticism that cost-cutting by expedition organizers was jeopardizing climber safety. For years, Kathmandu has issued Everest permits to anyone willing to pay $11,000, regardless of whether they were rookie climbers or skilled mountaineers. This year, a record 885 people climbed Everest. That's 644 of them from the south and 241 from the northern flank in Tibet. 9 of the 11 deaths were on the Nepal side, and at least 4 of the deaths this season were blamed on overcrowding. A traffic jam forced teams to wait for hours in freezing temperatures to reach Everest's 8,848-meter summit and then descend, increasing the risk of frostbite, altitude sickness, and exhaustion from depleted oxygen levels. But experts say the bigger killer was inexperience among a new wave of ill-prepared mountaineer tourists. Nepal is home to 8 of the world's 14 highest peaks, and foreign climbers that flock to its mountains are a major source of revenue for the country.
The World Health Organization announced a new Ebola vaccination campaign in Burundi to protect health and frontline workers there. The WHO-supported campaign is being implemented under the leadership of the Ministry of Public Health and AIDS Control and financially supported by Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. Burundi has received doses of the Ebola vaccine RVSV Zibov to protect against the Zaire strain of the virus, which is currently affecting the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Although the vaccine has not yet been approved, nor has its commercial use been authorized, it has shown itself to be effective and safe during Ebola outbreaks in West Africa. Further scientific research is required before the vaccine can be licensed.
To prepare for the next mission to Mars in 2020, NASA has taken to the lava fields of Iceland to get its new robotic space explorer ready for the job. With its black basalt sand, windswept dunes and craggy peaks, the Lambarauun lava field at the foot of Iceland's second biggest glacier, Langjökull, was chosen as a stand-in for the red planet's surface. Watch this.
Independent, that's how the suspension takes up. We're getting exactly the kind of patterns of material transport that the scientists want to see. So it's a very good analog for Mars exploration. We could take the data from the scientists so they get to see what they're doing. But again, I mean,
the main reason that we come here is because of the mineralogy. The mineralogy in Iceland is very similar to what we would find on Mars.
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
Sa gitna ng dilim, ako ang mata sa sahing papawid. Ako ang dilat sa tuwing ang bayan ko ay tulog ng mahimbing. Ang aming buhay, handang ialay para sa bayan. Kayo'y handang maglingkuran.
Join us in celebrating the 72nd anniversary of the Philippine Air Force.
Fears of another recession causing panic on Wall Street, the Dow taking a dramatic tumble, ending the day down more than 700 points at the closing bell. 800 there on the chart. Take a look. The huge slide was set off by one single warning, experts say, a specific economic indicator that is historically predicted on coming recessions, a measure that flashes a red warning light for the first time since 2005. But President Trump once again blamed the Fed for the economic woes and the yield curve inversion, saying the U.S. Central Bank is a bigger threat than China and is clueless. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 3.1% to finish at 25,479.42, a loss of about 800 points, its worst day of 2019. The broad-based S&P 500 slumped 2.9% to 2,840, while the tech-rich Nasdaq Composite Index dropped 3.0% to 7,773.94. The sell-off came shortly after the yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury note briefly dipped below the yield on the 2-year, a dynamic that has been a reliable harbinger of past recessions. The rout followed the latest stream of poor economic data from overseas, including the weakest Chinese factory output data in 17 years and German data showing the economy contracted in the second quarter. The intensifying U.S. trade war with China has been a key factor in the concerns about the slowing global economy, but shortly after the Dow hit bottom, President Trump renewed his attacks on the Federal Reserve and its chairman Jay Powell, whom President Trump appointed. He said, "China is not our problem. Our problem is with the Fed," Trump tweeted, blaming clueless Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve. The Fed raised too much, too fast. Now, too slow to cut. Germany and many others are playing the game. Crazy inverted yield curve. We should easily be reaping big rewards gains, but the Fed is holding U.S. back, he said. The gloomy economic reports have fueled expectations that the leading central banks will undertake new stimulus measures. The Fed Reserve cut the benchmark interest rates last month for the first time in more than a decade and is expected to make additional cuts in the months ahead. President Trump has said he wants the Fed to cut borrowing rates by a full point.
We have virtually no inflation in our country. If the Federal Reserve would bring down interest rates over a period of time, I would love to see a point or even a little bit more than that. If they would stop quantitative tightening, we have a rocket ship. I mean, we're doing well without it, but we're being handcuffed by the Federal Reserve. If they would stop that, it would be incredible.
Asian markets sank after the Dow suffered its worst day of the year as fears of a global recession mounted, with investors fleeing equities. Tokyo's key Nikkei index nosedived nearly 2% at the open before recovering slightly to finish the morning 1.2% down. The losses followed a dark day on European bourses and on Wall Street, with all three U.S. benchmarks tumbling around 3% and U.S. bond yields plunging as investors deserted stocks for safer treasury assets. Mizuho Securities said worries over the U.S. economic recession grew, while negative economic data for China and Germany also prompted investors to downgrade their views on the global economy. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury note briefly slid below the yield on the 2-year bond, a so-called inversion that has been a reliable harbinger of recession for decades. The trade war has hammered global demand, with Chinese industrial output hitting a 17-year low, while investment and retail sales have also slowed in the world's number 2 economy. Weeks of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong have added to the climate of uncertainty, with Beijing referring to the increasingly violent demonstrations as terrorism, stoking fears of a Chinese crackdown. Shanghai and Jakarta fell 0.7%, while Sydney plummeted more than 2%. Singapore also shed 0.9%, but Hong Kong edged up 0.1% after opening 1.5% down.
Argentine President Mauricio Macri announced plans for salary hikes and tax cuts Wednesday after voters turned resoundingly against his austerity policies, sparking days of economic turmoil. Macri, who seeks re-election in October, said he will cut income taxes for workers, increase subsidies, and introduce a 90-day freeze on fuel prices to help ease the economic shock. He also announced an unspecified increase in the monthly minimum wage, currently 12,500 Argentinian pesos or $208, saying it would benefit 2 million workers. The president's announcement did little to immediately ease market concerns. However, with the peso slipping more than 6% to close at 62.18 to the dollar. The drop means the Argentine currency has lost more than a quarter of its value since Friday. Macri also said the measures would benefit 17 million workers and their families and all small and medium-sized businesses, formal and informal, state and private. The president said the package of measures, which will cost the state $665 million, would relieve the pockets of Argentines hit by 55% inflation.
Entiendo su enojo, su cansancio. Solo les pido que no pongamos en duda el trabajo que hicimos juntos. Sintieron...
Eagle News International will be right back. Stay tuned.
The Cine Bata Video Festival is calling for submission of entries, with this year's theme, United in Love. If you are a Filipino video content creator, show us your best work for a chance to represent the Philippines. Deadline of submission is on August 30, 2019. For inquiries, visit or contact the following.
ASEAN in Focus, Monday to Friday, 2 to 2:30 p.m.
Church of Christ held a series of outreach mission across Canada. Here's Marco Zarudo from our Canada Bureau.
Tonight here in North York, Ontario, Canada, the Church of Christ, along with the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation, continue a series of outreach programs across Canada.
Despite its vibrance and diversity, Toronto has its own issues when it comes to homelessness, poverty, and hunger. According to foodbankscanada.ca, Canadians visited food banks 1.1 million times in March 2018. And that 35% of those relying on food banks are children. Tonight, hundreds of care packages were given to those challenged by poverty and hunger in the city of Toronto.
About 4 days ago, me being part of the Christian Family Organization, I was given a call from the district office to put together this Hate for Humanity. My efforts were just a small piece of what was happening. My efforts involved volunteering time, volunteering efforts to do purchasing of products, to do the actual packaging of the products, to assemble brethren and workers to help in the packaging of the products, and finally the transportation. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of effort. We worked way into the morning hours, making sure that we got 1,000 packages assembled, put together, so that we could hand them out to the less fortunate in our community. Once again, this is just the magnificence and the beauty of the Felix Y. Manalo Foundation.
I was just so happy when I was informed that we will have our Aid for Humanity again for the District of Greater Toronto, and I was glad that I am a member of this food committee in Greater Toronto District. Brethren, they got all excited, and also, of course, us, because this is our role, serving the food to the brethren. And every time we do this, we do it all our heart because it is our holy duty. We were serving with all smile with the guests, of course, and we thank all our guests that who came to the event. Although that it was very far, donations were distributed to the recipients, like the guests, and some agencies, which one, like their shelters, we distributed them to the people who are needy here in Greater Toronto.
So we are here for the Aid to Humanity project from the Church of Christ, Recession of Cristo. I'm here as a performer, as a dancer performer. I was up on stage doing a couple of numbers just to, get everyone energized and to get everyone hyped to, receive all these food packages.
Now, there might not be an overnight answer when it comes to solving poverty and hunger, but as citizens and members of the community, each of us can help in finding a solution. Live from Toronto, Canada, this is Marco Zerudo for EBC News.
Meanwhile, as cities and towns grow, we often think of children, young families, and even young adults. But do we ever stop to think about the elderly members of our communities? See how these volunteers spend some genuine quality time with these wonderful and valuable group of elderly from Bangsar, Malaysia. Our EBC correspondent from Kuala Lumpur, Wee May See, reports.
The members of the Iglesia ni Cristo from the local congregation of Bangsar in the Ecclesiastical District of Malaysia once again exert effort in bringing joy and kindness by visiting the residents of Enyuan Old Folks Home, a dedicated nursing home in Petaling Jaya under the INC Giving Project of the church. Despite the busy schedule for every individual, members of the Church of Christ in this part of the world always do their best to find them to volunteer and get involved in some charitable organizations to give back to the community here. Weeks before this activity, everyone instilled a spirit of teamwork to make this activity successful. They prepared good build bags filled with basic necessities and boxes of sundry goods. Not only that, they also shared the funny and inspiring stories to the residents, which warmed their hearts and a spirit of belongingness.
The members of the Church of Christ, whenever or wherever we are, we uphold one of the primary teachings in the church, which is whenever you possibly can, you do good to those who need it, because there will always be people who need help everywhere and anywhere.
A short period of time spent with the residents indeed brought smile to everyone who participated. The experience provided them a strong sense of meaning and purpose in life. Without being affected by the difference in race and language, the management staff and the residents were so thankful to the administration of the Iglesia ni Cristo for reaching out to them. They greatly appreciated the time and companionship of the church member, which brightened up their day. Mr. Sank, the secretary of Enyuan Old Folks Home, presented a certificate of appreciation to the Church of Christ to recognize its effort in reaching out to the community here in Malaysia.
大家好，我叫 Stanley， 我是恩源老人之家的负责人。OK， 恩源老人之家成立了2017年6月2日，至今已经成立了2年2个月了。然后很感谢大家一路以来的支持，也很感谢这个 Church of Christ 的帮忙。他们至今已经来了2次，已经帮助我们中心很大的忙了。然后再加上他们很关心老人家，然后来到的时候也很关爱，然后我也是非常感谢他们的。对于他们 Church of Christ 来到中心的探访，我觉得我非常的开心，也非常的感恩感激。然后社会上的老人们也是需要这种团体的关爱，然后再加上他们是不分种族、不分宗教，然后来关爱这些老人们。
Members of the Church of Christ who participated in this activity expressed their gratitude to the church administration for launching charitable activities such as this. There will be more activities such as this to be continued to be held by the Church of Christ in order to show their love and care to their fellow men in Malaysia.
These charity events or humanitarian activities is actually one of the commandments of our Almighty God we follow inside the church, to love our neighbors. So we show our compassion, we show our care, especially for the needy. We are also trying to introduce to them, by means of our humanitarian activities, the doctrines about the Iglesia ni Cristo.
From Eagle News Service here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, this is Hui Mei Si and I'm 125.
Thank you, Ms. Hui Mei Si, our ABC correspondent in Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you. Thank you, we may see. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards on Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and we're one with 25.